Hi, my name is Matt Sitter. I'm CEO of AFN. At AFN, we believe that change is where opportunity happens. And the best way to find opportunity in change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. In our events, we try and bring together subject matter experts on interesting topics of the day, new technologies, new management techniques that will allow you to think more about your business and how you can actually change what you're doing as well. Today, I have with me Po-Chi Wu. Po-Chi has been a guest with us before, and it's really great to have him. Po-Chi has had a varied career. He's been a professor at UC Berkeley and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. He's got a PhD. His career spans the US and Asia. He's been a venture capitalist, an entrepreneur, and he is very passionate about helping the startup community and spends a ton of time with an organization called Skydeck, related to University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Po-Chi. It's good to see you.
Oh, thank you very much, Matt. It's always a pleasure.
Good deal. Today, we're going to talk about DAOs. So we had Po-Chi on earlier, and he was telling us a little bit about blockchain and all the mysterious and wonderful things related to blockchain that we're trying to decipher. DAOs are a unique part of when we think about blockchains. So maybe just to start, Po-Chi, can you describe what a DAO is and why they're important?
Okay, so DAO, DAO, is an acronym for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. And the idea is using the blockchain infrastructure as a backbone, if you will, of an organization. The intent is to create an organization that does not have a hierarchy, does not have a centralized control. So like our enterprises, typical C Corp, Fortune 500 company, you have all those layers of management, and you have very clear distinctions between who has what responsibilities and authorities, and so on. And then you have shareholders and the board and so on. And it's a very long established type of structure. I think one of the motivations in the blockchain community was they look at a lot of our established institutions as, of course, being centralized. But the problem with centralization is that there is a lack of transparency. People don't know what's going on. They are completely dependent on the reports that you get from whatever levels. And we don't know how much truth, if you will, how complete those reports are. So that's one problem. Another problem with centralization is that even if you're getting, reasonably accurate reports, it all depends on the data and who controls the data. Well, someone in the organization, some person, some department, IT, infotech, excuse me, informational technology department, CTO, chief technical officer. Someone has actually the capability of going in and changing the data, literally. And perhaps no one would ever find out. Unlikely, but anyway, that exists, that does exist. There have obviously been cases of fraud and so on. And so in a decentralized structure, presumably that would not happen. And the concept behind blockchain is that all the data is stored in a large number of different databases, different servers, different locations basically under different operational control by different people. But all the databases are continuously in real time synchronized. So to change the data in one database is certainly possible, but very difficult to implement that same change throughout the entire network of hundreds, or in the case of Bitcoin and Ethereum, we're talking about thousands, 5,000, 10,000 nodes, so server farms that are running these software programs. So it's essentially impossible to do that. And so I think that was always one of the key concepts. And so the question was, and the question has been for more than the last, now 13 years, right, since the publication of the famous Satoshi white paper is describing blockchain and Bitcoin. It's been 13 years. And it's a technology in search of a problem. As a venture capitalist and also as someone who's spent decades working with entrepreneurs, it's a very common mindset for engineers especially. That they come up with some brilliant ideas, some new technology, truly is interesting and creative and a great technology. And then they're trying to say, okay, now where could we use this technology? Blockchain is definitely, in my mind, in that category. And so the DAO, the DAO, is kind of like, okay, here's an application area that we could use blockchain. And because it has all these other nice properties, the transparency, accountability, and the decentralized structure and so on, it sounds like it could be a much more democratic and potentially more fair, right? Fair to the members of the organization, a fair way to structure a social organization. And by social organization, I don't mean a social media company, a club. I mean, a corporation is a social organization with a purpose to do certain kinds of business. So just think of it as organizational structure. And again, all the objectives are these ideas of more democratic, more accountable, more transparent, and so on. And as I was thinking about preparing for this occasion to chat with Matt, I decided to write a short blog, which is always it's a good motivation for doing that. And basically the title was that the weak point in thinking about the DAO and the big challenge for DAO and for blockchain in general is human nature, right? We all understand ideals, ideal democracy, ideal fairness, but how do we actually implement that? How do organizations, how can they function? If you say, if you have a club, right, or a company, a small company, you have 50 people in the company, like an employee-owned co-op or organizations like that. With 50 people, you could actually make decisions in a reasonable time frame, holding the consensus, getting people on board with new initiatives and dealing with objections and so on. But when you have 5,000 and then 10,000 and, larger numbers, million, how can you assure fairness? You can't even listen to all these people. You couldn't read everybody's input in some text format or whatever. And so just conceptually, even before you think about how do you record all of this information and interaction on a blockchain, how do you actually, what are you going to capture? What is this conversation? How does this conversation flow? How do you move things forward? And so in the last decade or so, there have been a number of attempts to create organizations like this. I think one of the most notable and really in a way, a pioneer and a real prime example of the idealism and the philosophy of the DAO is, in fact, the Ethereum Foundation, right? So established by the founder of Vitalik Buterin, who, of course, invented Ethereum as an alternative blockchain to Bitcoin. And it has the additional feature of allowing this idea of smart contracts. So the Bitcoin blockchain is very simplistic. It's really only good for single transactions, one single transaction. I transfer money to you, or I buy something from someone else, and it's very straightforward. But the idea of smart contracts is we can have a more complex type of exchange. For example, there are DAOs that do investing in real estate. So it's actually no different than an investment club. You have an investment club of 10 members or so, or 50 members, and you say, hey, let's collectively buy a piece of real estate. And you could structure that club in the form of a DAO. And so there are DAOs that do that. Hard to tell how well that works. There are a lot of issues with regulation, with the legal structuring, with, of course, with enforcement and so on. There are also some DAOs that are being used, interestingly enough, this is kind of like a second order blockchain, which is they're saying, oh, we'll form this DAO, we'll crowdsource money, we'll get people to invest in our DAO. They invest by buying the tokens or the coin, the crypto of the DAO. and then we will use these proceeds to invest in other new blockchain projects. Now, that's very appealing if you happen to be, this blockchain enthusiast and you think, and first of all, and I think this is an important thing to remember, a lot of the expansion, the early growth of blockchain occurred because some people way back in the very, very beginning, in the dark ages when a Bitcoin was worth, a few dollars or a couple $100 or whatever it was, these people, they became incredibly wealthy, multimillionaires and even probably a few billionaires. And they just needed somewhere to continue playing with their assets. And so they continue to build more blockchains. But anyway, so the idea behind Ethereum was that, first of all, you can do complex transactions. You have what's called smart contracts, which basically mean an automated series of software instructions. And Ethereum currently, and the foundation currently, is not structured completely as a DAO. Vitalik Buterin has indicated that that is his ultimate or eventual intent, but he needs to make sure that the structure is going to work. And I think it's very interesting that relatively recently, a few months ago, there's this thing called the merge, and this was an attempt to change the fundamental structure of what is called the proof of work, a mechanism for maintaining the integrity of the blockchain from so-called proof of work, which is the Bitcoin original, to something called proof of stake, which turns out to be much more efficient. So it takes far less electrical power consumption to run these computers. Transactions can proceed much more quickly. It answers a lot of the original objections or difficulties that exist with blockchain in commercial transactions. Anyway, the fact that has actually gone well and smoothly so far, after a few months, is a huge testament to him, to his brilliance, and of course the whole foundation. And I think that's like one of the first examples, first test of how this whole structure, this decentralized network structure, can actually function. I think maybe we take a pause there. You can ask some questions.
No, there's a lot of good stuff in there. So, one of the takeaways is DAOs are not a necessity for a blockchain product, but the blockchain enables a DAO to exist. Is that a fair?
Oh, absolutely. It is right to think of the DAO as a particular type of application area, based on a blockchain structure, infrastructure. And there's nothing sacred about any particular blockchain. It could be on Ethereum, it could be on any of the other new competitive blockchains.
So if we're talking about DAOs generally, what determines the size? When we're with an organization that exists today, you have authority. Hey, I'm the CEO. I get to make the decisions around here. With a DAO, what determines how big of a voice that you get around it? And is it typically like, hey, we're tallying votes here? How does that work?
Right. So that's what I was alluding to. The idea of being decentralized is somehow democratic. And if I'm a member, do I have a vote? And if I have a vote, how are votes counted? Is there some weighting factor? If I am running a node, for example. So if we use, again, a more practical example of Ethereum, it's not necessarily the best way, but at least it gives you something more specific or concrete to think about. If I am just a user of Ethereum, so I own some Ethereum, however much, 1, 2, 500, 1,000, 10,000 Ethereum units, does that give me a vote? Well, I think in terms of foundation, no, not really, because I'm just a user. Now, if I were running a node and I'm actually processing transactions on Ethereum, yeah, I should have, my vote should count, because suddenly my operation and maybe my livelihood, if I'm a so-called miner, if I'm, really doing this big time and I'm trying to really help the network, the Ethereum network, function efficiently and properly. I might need an installation of $1 million, millions of dollars of computing power, and that's highly dependent on the value of the ether that I would be receiving in this compensation for supporting the network. And so, hey, suddenly, I should have more of a voice, but how much more, do I have more than the guy next to me who's also running a similar facility, but only has, let's say, 20% the capacity that I have, I think these are, so the problem, again, this is a human nature issue. What is fair? And if you break it down to the most granular level, you say everybody has only one vote. Well, that's not fair either, because it doesn't address the risk issue, and we're talking about, and I think this is where the collision and the challenge of blockchain and DAOs is. There's always a collision between the let's call it theoretical ideal, or the ideal and the philosophy, and the practicality, right? The practicality is what we have established, we've learned over centuries, right, to figure out what makes a financial system work. What is appropriate for a bank, for example, to do, or a simple case of lending. And so right now we're in the middle of some incredible, catastrophic failures in the crypto world, especially the thing called FTX.
Yeah.
And everyone is now piling on and saying, oh, well, this is a travesty. This should never have happened. And, this just proves why we need regulation and blah, blah, blah. It's really easy to see all this in hindsight. And I'm sure some people could or had some, concerns about this before the fact. But lending on a crypto base, based on cryptocurrencies, to any rational person, that's incredibly risky, right? Because there's no fundamental basis for the value of any cryptocurrency, whether Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any of them. There's no gold standard. There's no tangible asset underlying any of these things. And so the value simply goes up and down depending on the amount of shared belief. And unfortunately, the other half of shared belief is manipulation, right? Yeah. For sure, guaranteed, there are any number of bad actors in the crypto trading world that are simply looking to cause trouble and benefit from that, whatever that means, driving price up and down, and maybe in some cases even causing this type of massive failure. I'm not saying that, for FTX. I don't know any of the details, so don't take anything I'm saying as specific, accusations of the founder, CEO, or of anyone else. But I think it is a structural challenge, right? The structural issue is, how do we determine fairness? How do we understand that? And how do we enforce these things? The volatility, the uncertainty, the risk, I think that's a given. People need to just have, eyes wide open, their mind clear, and you pick your investments however you will. And then you've got to be a big boy or girl and, take whatever comes. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's the nature of speculation and gambling.
So, absolutely, and I think that there's, people have made attempts to tether values to things, but we've found those links to be tenuous. When we're thinking about the DAO, so one of the things that's coming across to me is whoever controls the DAO actually can determine to what degree they want votes to count or something. They're going to determine what the organization can look like. The signifying characteristic of a DAO is that it's decentralized.
Well, it goes back to a more fundamental idea of, if, for example, this one, what do they call it? It's called City DAO, CITY, and they're trying to use the DAO principles to literally populate a city. So a physical piece of real estate. They have acquired 40 acres in the state of Wyoming. And the reason they use Wyoming is because the legal regulatory environment in Wyoming is particularly friendly to blockchain and crypto. And they claim to have maybe 5,000 members. Now, before they actually form this entity called a DAO, and that's not a legal entity at the moment, there's no recognition of what what is legally constituted as a DAO, but it must start with kind of like an articles of incorporation, something like that. And before you join, you obviously want to know whether, how all of these things work, again, what your rights and responsibilities are, how your votes might or might not be counted. So you know that going in. It's not like you join and then the rules are put on top. No, you have to start with the rules, and then people who join, you buy into the rules. That's that's the way it works. So there is no control after the fact. Once those DAO principles are set, then there is no control. However, changes are possible, and that's what I was alluding to earlier. But changes require kind of like what we have here in California, the proposition mechanism for creating legislation. So basically, you make a proposal, you throw it out for a popular vote, and if the popular vote is majority or some kind of majority, then it can in fact become law. And there are good arguments on both sides of how well that works in our current political system. But it is intended in a similar spirit to circumvent or shorten the standard legislative process, which has multiple layers. You go through some local and regional and state assembly and state senate and governor and, all these people who, will try to modify the proposal to gain the type of support that they think is necessary. And that's what happens. And so sometimes those the outcome is not necessarily what the originators had in mind. The proposition is much more straightforward. It says, okay, I want to do X, and I'm going to put it to a popular vote. And if people vote for it, then it becomes law.
What are, just from a simple mechanics perspective, what's the communication channel that DAOs use?
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's actually a deeper question than you might imagine.
Okay.
So first of all, when we talk about communication, we talk about text, email, calls, whatever, right? That's the standard kind of communication. But then there's a whole nother level of communication, which I think is really important. And that is in the way the cryptocurrencies work, the tokens, right? Because the tokens are supposed to represent some kind of ownership, some kind of vote. And how those, what happens with those tokens in the market, which, no one has any control over, but that's very important. And it gives some very strong signs to a DAO and to its members about how things are working. As I said, at the moment, the legal and regulatory status is not clear. So that's a very, very serious, to me, a serious weakness, because that means that whole area of that kind of communication is unclear. So suppose someone files a lawsuit against the DAO or from within the DAO about something to do with these properties. Someone, for example, doesn't want multi-unit dwellings, right? They want only single-family dwelling. Okay, how is that going to be resolved? That may or may not have been decided at the beginning, because obviously that depends on a specific property that they buy and so on and so forth. So you can imagine that there are going to be these kinds of challenges, and every time it will be the same challenge. You'll come up with the ideal and philosophical approach. You'll meet a physical reality, and then you will inevitably encounter the legal and regulatory piece, because that's not going to go away. No matter how we decentralize whatever it is that you want to do, how the world works fundamentally is we have to have some kind of law enforcement. Especially in America, we always think we believe in the rule of law. If we don't believe in the rule of law, we don't have law enforcement, then all we have is chaos. So, we know that, and that's not the answer. So, this is not going to be solved by blockchain. This is not going to be solved by any particular technology per se. This is a social political problem that is, is age old. And I think this is maybe one of the last things that we can cover here in this general conversational part, which is, I started out saying that this is, a new technology, very sophisticated software, very complicated software that was difficult for people to understand initially, but is a technology solution looking for a problem. And I think it definitely was promoted by a lot of young people, certainly younger people. It was promoted by non-academics. It did not come out of the academic world at all. So in many ways, it was a typical social experiment. People were looking for new ideas that would challenge them, hope that some of these would work. But even if each of these, for example, the blockchain startups, even though many of the startups are going to fail, they are forcing this kind of conversation, this kind of re-examination of our existing institutions, our existing framework. And I think the ultimate ideal is we would really like to continue improving how society works so that it does provide more benefit to more people, that it is accountable, that it is more fair. And we are seeing that, okay? Even outside of the blockchain realm, I think blockchain does deserve a lot of credit for that. That it sort of brought not exactly a spotlight, but it's more like a pulse light that has shown on a lot of different industries and different problems. That's saying, hey, there should be a better way for us to treat each other with respect, because that's fundamental, right? The idea of the blockchain is we all have to respect each other, respect the way we have encoded our governing principles. So there's a mutual respect. There is, a sense of common benefit. And again, that's the foundation of Ethereum. Vitalik Buterin said, I wanted to create, I'm committed. And he absolutely is. He's a remarkable person. I've had the pleasure of meeting him casually in the past. He's a visionary. He has this idea that he wants to do something. He is doing something for the common good. Okay? It's not to make himself a billionaire, not to achieve any particular thing, not to land a rocket ship on Mars, but something that will help the common good, everybody. Okay? All colors, races, ethnicities, all genders, all anything, and not differentiating between people who currently have power or, wealth assets and others who don't. It's not, you are just an individual, and with the individual rights and responsibilities and so on. But I think, it's the idea that you want to create something that is really going to respect everyone. So that's a huge, huge task, and it typically has been taken on by people who are more, I would call it, genuine spiritual leaders, so a religious leader or some, again, the philosophy. And so what's new about blockchain and Ethereum is this coming from a technology perspective, but it is still this very idealistic vision of how we can improve the world.
So certainly ambitious, and we remain in this massive experimentation phase where, hey, there's a lot going on that we're trying to figure out what the impacts are. That's why you have someone who can end up having $30 billion one day and about 3% of that the next.
Yeah, it's so tragic. I mean, I don't know the gentleman, never met him, but, he is the son of two Stanford professors. He went to Stanford himself, clearly a bright guy. He was the darling of the industry, politicians and obviously venture capitalists. Sequoia Capital put, I don't know, $210 million or something, certainly well over 200 million. And many organizations around the world. I heard Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, Singapore, Singapore, wow. Wow. Temasek, and so on. A lot of people bought into his vision. And probably the vision was good. And he also painted himself, what do you call himself? Something, an effective altruist. Okay. Well, it turns out, yeah, he was very effective, but was he truly altruistic? Well, he certainly gave away a lot. There's no doubt about that. And he contributed a lot to the political campaigns. And, he was definitely more socially minded. But I think he was clearly lacking, I mean, to be fair, he was clearly lacking in experience, in having the discipline to run an organization the way it needed to be, dealing with the kinds of monies that it was. So anyway, this is not about him. It is a grand experiment. It is about these conversations. It is about getting the regulators, the politicians to really take this very seriously. This is very serious. You can't just wipe out $30 billion. And actually, it's far worse than that. That's only FTX. They're talking about trillions of dollars of value wiped out from the crypto industry broadly. Hey, this is not okay. This cannot be allowed to happen. This is simply, the Wild West, chaotic. So the good news is more people will pay attention. People will start to think. Laws and regulations, unfortunately, will have to take place, but they'll be more thoughtful. People will, and there's more experience now on the crypto side, blockchain side. People are getting, smarter about how to solve some of the problems. But I continue to go back to the original point, and the idea that this is going to be a multidimensional conversation is the point. It is about human nature. You're talking about a social, political organization, always going to be complicated.
Yeah. Well, in the same way we have not cracked the nut on human nature, we have not yet cracked the nut on blockchain. So
right.
Lots more for us to learn. Yeah. Pochi, this was awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time and helping us learn a little bit more. Thanks, and looking forward to our next conversation where there's definitely going to be more that happens here, so we're going to have more to talk about.
All right. We'll find something.
Great. Thanks.